for most superior varieties of mangoes, they are grafted. So I have some material for grafting here, and we will put this onto these rootstock, these seedling mangoes, and everything from that point forward, after it takes and after we cut off this remaining rootstock, will be this variety, which happens to be Cogshaw. So there's a lot of advantages to grafting. You get a known variety and you get a nice root system. You know, some people ask, can't you air layer mangoes? Really not worth it. They don't air layer very well, and you know, these will have nice tap roots, have a nice strong root system. So this is the way to go. And so grafting is taking a piece of one tree and putting it on another tree, and after this there needs to be a union formed, and after it starts growing on this tree, then that's a successful graft, which is also known as a take. So the best time to graft is, of course, in the warm weather, but also when the plants are growing a lot. And you start usually in the spring, and right now it's after mango season. We have the time to graft, and it's still, the plants are still active. In the winter, it's just a little bit more difficult to graft in Florida. It's possible, but more difficult. So grafted mango trees have a lot of advantages. You know, first off, you have a known variety. This is Cogshaw. When it takes on this plant, it's going to be a Cogshaw tree. And so you know what you're getting. If you plant a seed, you don't know if you're going to like the fruit or not. There's some varieties that are true to seed, but many varieties are not. So anyway, this is a good insurance policy. You graft, you know what you're going to get. Also, if you let just a seedling tree grow, it grows like a giant pencil. There's just not a lot of lateral growth. And so, you know, if we put a branch tip on, then it will make a nice, much nicer looking tree. And of course, another advantage to grafting a tree is that you can get fruit in 2 or 3 years. And if you plant a seed, not only do you not know what the fruit is going to taste like in a lot of circumstances, but also it can be 10 years before you get fruit. So anyway, most of us are not that patient to wait 10 years, so grafting is a good option. Grafting doesn't have to be difficult. I'm going to show you the way I was taught years ago. Of course, I've modified it slightly because of the new materials that we can use in grafting that weren't available then. But let's get going. The first thing I want to show you, though, is what I've chosen to use for graft wood. And all of these, as I said, are Cogshaw mango. The ends of the branches, and actually where this brown is right here, there was a panicle that held flowers and probably a fruit. So after the fruit was off the tree, then the plant wants to grow. So it can't grow from that end, and so it forms these little buds to the side. These are little swelling buds that will form new branches. And so that's what you're looking for when you're choosing some graft wood. And so all of them, pretty much the same thing, all have these swelling buds. And so they're very active. You want to have, for successful grafting, you would like to have some warm weather, sunshine, and active graft wood and active rootstock. Just they're, you need it to be growing. And so let's get started with this. I'm going to prepare these scions for grafting. So basically, I'm just going to make a mess here for a little bit. We want to take all the leaves off close to where they would break off. Not get my fingers. That was always a lovely thing to not, because they're very sharp. But we just want to be able to use the buddy tape well, and if we have little ends of stems sticking out, it's just a little bit more difficult. So anyway, there you can still see these buds that are swollen here, and you can even see a little bit of swelling further down here. So this should be a successful piece of graft wood, but time will tell. I'll do the same thing here. Cut off these leaves. Now these buds are a little bit bigger on this particular piece. Right up here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I think I'll just sort of trim a little bit off of the biggest one. Sometimes they can be too big, but I think those are all a good size, especially with the materials that we'll be using for grafting. They're much easier to graft things these days than when I started. Back in the old days, practically hadn't invented electricity yet. Okay, so there we go. And we'll look up here. We see there's a nice bud there, and then over here that one's also rather large right there. So again, nice active piece of graft wood. You want to have things that, I like to have things that are green. They're much easier to deal with, and they also tend to grow faster once they've made that union with the rootstock. So there's a bud here. This one down here is actually a bigger one there, and then up here also. So again, I think that's going to be good. So I'm going to go get my buddy tape and I'll wrap those. Okay, so this is buddy tape. It's a wonderful invention for grafting. What you want to do with these scions or graft wood is to prevent moisture loss. And so this just seals it up very well. If it happens to break, just go over that area again with the buddy tape. And so anyway, this is what you're looking for. It's just a sealing up that top part of the scion. So again, we're using a little piece of buddy tape. Stretch it over the top. Want to get the corners all sealed up here. Don't want to have any holes in it, so you don't want the scion to dry out at all. Do this again. You want to stretch it before pulling it over. If you pull it against some of these little pieces of stem, it will break the buddy tape. So just stretch and then roll it around. And our last one. Okay, so here are the 4 scions that we'll be using. And one thing to keep in mind is when you have a bunch of scions that are wrapped in buddy tape, you don't want to have them touching because they actually sort of stick to each other and can pull little pieces of the buddy tape from their buddy next door. Anyway, these are all set to graft, so we'll move over to the rootstock and get going. When I first learned this particular way of grafting, I used a grafting knife, but I've sort of simplified things these days, and I just use a razor blade. And don't cut yourself and say it's my fault. You got to be careful with sharp things. If you want to use a grafting knife, that's great, but be careful with that also. It's just that the razor blades for young tender wood work out well. This is actually woodier than a lot of the grafting material I deal with, but it works. It's just sometimes a little tedious. So anyway, no matter what instrument you're using to cut the wood, it's safer if you hold the sharp instrument fairly steady and then you move the wood away from you. That way, if you're going like this, of course, you could slip and, best case scenario, like put a hole in your clothing. Worst case, of course, also stain the clothing with blood. But anyway, let's start with these. I'm going to just show you a few little modifications to the basic grafting. One tip is, you see where this leaf stem end here is on the little twig? That is the first cut I usually make. If you want to, we're going to basically make a big V cut here, and I don't want to line up this with the rootstock with having to deal with a little bump in it. So anyway, I just take the bump out first, and that way it's nice clean sides that I'm going to be lining up with the rootstock. So you want nice flat cut. It's very important not to have waves, and you also don't want to have little gouges or anything like that in it. So anyway, then there's the sort of a semicircle at the end. And so what I try and do is just take get the path going a little bit here. Just do the end, and then I can see better where I need to end up. And the goal is to have as thin of a point as possible. If you can imagine it being 1 cell thick, that's what the goal is. So right now that's pretty good. I probably can shave just a little bit more off without getting any of my finger in the way. So anyway, that's the 2 sides are approximately equal. You don't have to make yourself crazy with having them exactly equal. But this is how to prepare a scion for a cleft graft. So right now I'll do the very basic graft with this is just at the very top of the tree. We take off the top. Since it starts bending here, I think I'll just take it down here. And then you trim the leaves off from the side because you have to wrap this up very well. Now this is going to be a little smaller than the top here. So what I'm going to do is do an off-center cut of here so that it lines, you know, it's closer to the edges of that circle. So just be right along in here. And it's not a big deal. If you mess up, you can just cut a little further down or whatever. Okay. So then you just insert the graft wood or scion into here. I'll turn this around so you can see a little bit better. You want to line up one side, at least. Ideal situations you can line up both sides, but you see how this is right here. And you want to make sure that the rootstock is pliable enough to form a good union, which it is. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'll use a little bit more buddy tape and wrap this up so it doesn't lose any moisture at this point in the process. And also it will hold this in place for when we use an elastic. So wrap up here and then go down around where the bottom of that cut is. And I have one of these elastics that's made specifically for grafting. They do, if exposed to sunlight, will degrade, and so you don't end up girdling the tree, or the graft, I should say. So what you are doing is stretching this elastic, and so that it encourages a good union here. You want to squeeze that wood that we cut through of the rootstock so tight against the scion, so that it it can't really form a good union unless it's tight, but you don't want to strangle it. So there's but basically with this kind of grafting elastic, it won't let you graft or wrap too tight in most circumstances because it will just break. Then in order to just tie it off, you pull the end through a loop like that, and that's good to go. So that's one style. So we've just done a top cleft graft. So move another rootstock into position, and we will do a side cleft graft this time. So we're going to start the same way. Of course, I always like to get those bumps off. This one could be a little bit, I didn't trim that very closely with the pruners, so I'm going to just go back and trim that so it's not a problem when we go to wrap it. So I'm going to take that little stem end off, get the nice flat cut. Okay, and then this other side is going to have a little bit of a scoop to it, but end in a nice point. So important to get this done. I mean, when this is, as I said, a little bit woodier than I usually deal with, but it just takes a little more time to get the right cut when it gets older. So there's the end. It's very, very narrow, nice flat side on one side, and this is flat, but it has a little bit of an arch to it. So what we're going to do with this wood is we're going to do a side cleft graft. This is the, you know, the cut we made before, but this time we're just going to put it into a lower part of the plant instead of cutting the top off. So we're just going to make a cut into the rootstock here and try and get the same width as, I started off too narrow, not a problem. Just keep on going till I get to the right. I think that's going to be enough right there. We don't need that top part. Let's see how this fits in. Looks like it's gonna work out. Gotta make sure that this doesn't have any gaps in it too, so that looks good. So we'll put our little piece of buddy tape on. You gotta stretch it to make it stick to itself. Okay, then we get one of our grafting strips here, rubber strip, and pull, and then wrap around. I always pull when I'm on pulling away from the actual graft, so it doesn't make it shift its position at all. Right now it's lined up perfectly. So we want to make sure that we don't pull it out of position. Okay, so that should be enough. Tie it off, just pull it through, pull the end through so that it doesn't unravel. And that's a side cleft graft, one of my favorite ones, one of my favorite types of grafting. So we'll try and put this one down here. And, you know, if you have the time, just experiment with different things. It's fun to see what works and what doesn't and figure out why. But I think that right in this area would be a pretty good place to get in, like the veneer grafts. That's probably enough. So put a little edge there. Okay. So it's a matter of making a flat cut on this side. And a little notch here. So definitely not my preferred way of grafting, but I want to see if it works. Just saw Walter doing a whole bunch of these out in the Grove, so why not? This one little part here has to be trimmed off in order to fit in. So since we trimmed it off, I'm just going to snag a little piece of buddy tape to cover up that little piece, that area that we just notched out. So it looks like that we'll have to definitely tie that down more tightly than I normally do, but it looks like it will make contact there. Get this in place a little bit with the buddy tape. Another piece would be good. Slid over a little bit. This time I'm going to use a very serious elastic because I need to really pull this scion into this rootstock. So I will. This is a thicker and wider rubber strip for grafting, so it should really snug this in. Okay, so seems like that will be enough. Okay, and we've got one more. So first thing we need to do, of course, is make our V for another cleft graft, because I have to end with my favorite one. This is a little bit tough wood, but that seems like a nice flat cut. We'll work from the bottom a little bit here. When I get down to that sharpest possible point here with the tip of the V. So that looks pretty good. So I'm going to see if this goes right in here. Looks like it will. So I need to make a cut that's about as wide as what I just cut there. And this is a little bit wider. It's okay, we line it up to one side. And you want to push it gently all the way to the bottom of this cut area. And I can see there's a little bit of a problem with, there's a bump on this side here. And so I'll just take a little notch out of the rootstock so that it will lie flat against it. So it's right about here. I'll just take a little notch out. Okay, That should do it. Slide it right down. Make sure it's at the bottom. Wrap the buddy tape around. You can use grafting tape too, but I just like the way the buddy tape works. Very easy to use. And we need to use an elastic to make sure that the scion is making good contact with the rootstock. Whoops. That's an example of how it won't let you tie them too tightly. I was winding that a little bit too vigorously. So you basically just wrap it over the end of the elastic. That secures it, and then you just keep wrapping it without breaking it. And pull it through, the other end through. And there we go. So the last thing I'm going to do is cut off the new leaves and the areas that are about to be new leaves. Of course, with this one, the first plant we did was a top cleft graft, so there's nothing to cut off there. All the energy is going to go right to the top. But we don't want the energy coming to develop these leaves. New leaves don't earn their keep for like 45 days. And so it's just diverting the attention of the plant, we'll call it. If we take those new leaves off, there will be more resources to form this union here. This one, it needs leaves above to keep the sap flowing and stuff, but it really doesn't need to go up that far. Plus, we have new leaves forming there. So I'm just going to cut it back to here. Plenty of leaves to keep this plant active. And this one again has got those new leaves forming. We don't want that. So off they go. So now we just need to wait and see how those grafts do. We should know in a week or two how successful this was. So that's our mango grafting intro. First one we did is that top cleft graft. That was the first type of graft that I used ages ago. Then we did a side cleft graft, and so that's my current favorite. And we did this side veneer into the bark graft. That's not one I do, but if I can do this, you can do these other ones. And then we did another side cleft graft because you gotta end with my favorite, So anyway, try grafting. I know it's sort of intimidating, but it's really not once you start to do it. It's just a matter of getting grafting tape, elastics help, and of course a sharp instrument, and be careful with a sharp instrument. You can use knives, like a grafting knife, or an X-Acto knife, or like I use, a razor blade. And just remember to hold the sharp instrument fairly still and move the graft wood away from you. It's a lot safer that way. Go slowly. You can do it, and good luck.